Good morning, everyone. It'll just be a few moments. Good morning. Almost time to start. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning. I'm Sunnyvale Mayor Larry Klein. Welcome to the 26th installment of my weekly virtual office hours address. I hope everyone had a good Labor Day weekend and stayed safe. People continue to reach out to me and say they really appreciate these weekly live stream addresses and hearing from their mayor. So these will continue through the end of the year and through the end of the shelter in place and probably a lot longer. Uh, this Facebook Live event is a great weekly event that because it allows me to give you some really important updates, answer some of your questions, and of course, provide some words of encouragement. So thank you for allowing me to continue to represent you and work for Sunnyvale during these extraordinary times. I hope everyone is doing well and staying healthy. Please remember to take care of yourself, both physically and mentally. It is taxing. There's definitely a lot of fatigue. These are difficult times for so many of our residents, for so many people. And, keep following the county health orders. That's still critical. People need to do your part, whatever you can to stop the spread of the virus. Continue to wash your hands. Don't touch your face. Reduce the number of people that you come in contact with, and going out for only essential items. Maintain a safe social distance, and of course, wear your mask. It helps. It's mandatory. Conceivably, there could be fines. As I've said before, if you need a face covering, please contact me. I'm still having people that are needing them. It's like most people have them, but oh, I only have one, or I'm only using disposable masks. If the cloth masks that you wash, every time you get back to your home, are just as good, and that I think is really critical. So we're not out of the woods yet. Remember, you could be a carrier of the virus and not have symptoms, or someone that you meet could be asymptomatic. So hopefully everyone was especially careful over the Labor Day weekend. Uh, I'm hoping that we don't see a rise in the counts in the next 2 weeks like we saw after July 4th, but that's yet to be seen. So right now we are 178 days after the March 16th public health order went in place that started our attempt to slow the spread of COVID-19. So to put that in perspective, that's 26 weeks, officially half a year, that we've been sheltering in place. So that's a little sobering thought that for half of the last year, we have been staying at home, and dealing with the fatigue, the depression, and I do think that that has become more and more of an issue. The the mental weight of not having real social interaction, and as much as having Zoom meetings and phone calls and FaceTime meetings with friends, with family, it's not the same as being in the same room as someone, as hugging someone, as hearing their voice, through not through some technical means. And so definitely, whatever I can do, reach out to friends, check in with friends and family, making sure that they're all right. That social interaction is really important, and a lot of people miss it. So, and as far as me, I have daily press conferences and seminars to watch, conference calls to confer, to advocate on your behalf. It's a lot. It's a lot of work. Let's talk a little bit about what's happened, in the federal, state, and county and city level over the last week or so. It's been another busy week, but let's kind of go back to almost 2 weeks ago now. And so at that point, what happened was, with the change into the tiers, so the new 4 tiers: purple, red, orange, and yellow. What that allowed was, because we were in the purple tier, and so this is the state kind of tiered system. So on August 31st, which was 2 Mondays ago, certain barbershops, salons, were finally able to reopen. So under the purple kind of designation, and kind of this new tier system is only based upon two things. So it's simplified what the governor and what the state has been doing as far as monitoring counties, down to two main things. One is the new case rate per 100,000 residents, and two, the positive case rate of those tested. So reducing that down to kind of those bare minimums, and at that point, 98% of, or not 98, 89% of the counties were in purple. And so that was kind of a starting point that everybody in the majority of the state is under that kind of maximum restriction level. That being said, with the new state order, we finally saw barbershops open, salons open for indoor service, not just outdoor service. And I've heard a lot of positive feedback from residents that are happy to see that's part of finally being able to see their old hairdresser or barber has actually been a really positive thing. And from a business standpoint, I talked to several hair salon owners, and they're happy to get people inside because it was, washing hair. A lot of this wasn't feasible outdoors, and so that was actually really, really important. And then 2 Mondays ago was also the end of the legislative session. So the state legislators met, and it was the last day to pass those bills. And one of the bills that Governor Newsom signed that same Monday was AB 3088, which prevents landlords from evicting tenants for non-payment through January 31st. So it is important for renters that they have to pay 25% of their rent and file a declaration of financial hardship with their landlord. But it allowed at least some extended relief from possible evictions. And after January 31st, tenants could be evicted for not paying their rent, but not for being they can't be evicted for not paying the rent up until January 31st. They can be evicted for failing to pay rent after February and onward. So it's some relief. I was hoping that there would be some relief for the landlords themselves from a mortgage standpoint. I've heard that the governor is working with several banks, but nothing has been done there as of yet. From an executive order, conceivably the governor could do something, but it's important that at least we're protecting our renters. And as far as the unpaid rent, both the amount owed between since March, and then the portion for the next 5 months would be treated as consumer debt. So if a landlord needed to recover that, it would be through small claims court. So we'll see how the court systems can handle this. I've heard for things like traffic fines, the courts have actually extended. They were supposed to start seeing court cases and traffic fine cases in September, October. And I've heard those have been pushed off into 2021. So definitely the court systems are been a little bumpy, and what they're going to be focusing on, I don't think, is going to be evictions when we get to more operation. Last Thursday, the California Independent Systems Operator, so the ISO, declared a flex alert for all of Labor Day weekend, calling for energy conservation from our residents. And so that statewide flex alert applied to both Northern and Southern California, and it began Saturday and extended through Monday because of the high heat. Definitely, it was a very big heat wave over the weekend, especially Saturday, or especially Sunday. There were possible rolling blackouts, although I heard that PG&E mainly maintains service, and so I think thanks to all the consumers who conserved energy, that was the important thing. It's hitting those peak loads in late afternoon that had the energy operators deciding to do those rolling blackouts. So I know that there were some, let's say, transformers that blew and other things. There's constant outages in neighborhoods because of trees, because of other equipment failures. That being said, it was, I didn't hear of rolling blackouts in this area. I think that there were a few other areas of the state that were actually affected. And then because of the high heat, one of the things that Sunnyvale did was opening our cooling centers at Murphy Park. So I was happy to hear that those were getting the word out. Got a few more people in than the last time we opened those cooling centers. And so, I want to thank our CERT team who provided some operation management, and that's one of the big things is we rely on our CERT volunteers to basically provide additional services, that volunteer effort, so that we don't have to deal with city staff or public safety staff. When we needed to manage the crosswalks, so adding additional crosswalk personnel last year, the CERT team stepped up and did that work, and I'm really proud of that effort and how they continue to help our community. So so that was one of the things that we did from a city standpoint to basically deal with people. Normally we would have the library open, and because of COVID-19, we haven't opened our library inside except for to our librarians. We do have our plaza service open, so I'm hoping that people are continuing to use that. And as far as last weekend, I hope everyone had a good weekend. Although I think that a lot of people spent it indoors because of the high heat, and it was really bad on Sunday. But I think that it's been an interesting time, and we'll talk a little bit about the weather this week. Normally we don't talk much about weather, but the weather and the atmospheric conditions were pretty amazing. So over the last month. So on Tuesday, Governor Newsom held a press conference, and he had basically given us some indication that this was going to be happening the week before. But 5 California counties, including Santa Clara County, were moved from the purple to the red tier. And what this allowed was reopening of certain indoor operations and some additional businesses, and allows for certain activities to resume. So with the appropriate protocols, of course, and protective measures that need to still be followed. And from a Santa Clara County standpoint, it affected several businesses. First of all was personal care services. So barbershops, hair salons, and nail salons had been allowed indoor operation as of a week before. So as of the previous Monday, but it also allowed for operation of some personal services, and that include massage services, nail salons. That was an important change as far as that's concerned. And I've already seen that some of those services within the city have actually begun operations. The moving to red also allowed museums, zoos, aquariums to open for indoor operation with up to 25% capacity. Gyms and fitness centers are allowed to open with 10% capacity, and shopping malls are allowed to open indoors to up to 50% capacity. Previously, it had been 25% capacity. So you see some of Valley Fair having more indoor operation, and so all these businesses really need to follow the county directives put out last July as far as indoor operations. As far as all the different safety operations, as far as cleaning the seats, cleaning all the equipment between each customer usage, if you're talking about nail salons or massage. But what this didn't provide, and this is the difference between what the state directives are and the county directives, it did not provide indoor dining. It did not provide indoor movie theaters operations, and it did not allow indoor gatherings. So indoor gatherings remain prohibited in Santa Clara County under our local risk reduction order. So as much as people are like, and I've had several restaurants reach out that, this is allowing indoor dining until, and that was one of the things that the July order didn't define what the operations are indoors. And so that's one of the important things is, defining what those restrictions are, and then having, whatever the restaurants in this case, or whatever the operation businesses are, of what they're doing to follow the county health order is part of this opening up process. And so, and one of the other things that going to red allowed was, if we stay 2 weeks into red, at that point, schools from K through 12th grade could actually open up. And so one of the things that I haven't really publicized that to some degree, because for one thing, it's a 2 week period, and a lot of this has to do with what we've seen over the July 4th weekend and whether or not our numbers get worse. And so I'm hoping that our numbers don't get worse, but conceivably in this 2 week period we could go back from red to purple. Not really sure what's going to happen, of course, but from that standpoint, schools cannot do anything until they've been in that zone, into the red zone, for 2 weeks. And so at that point, they could conceivably open operations up. That being said, it's not, it's up to the individual schools and school districts on whether or not they reopen. In Sunnyvale, actually, under the previous state orders, elementary schools, so K through 8, K through 6, could request basically an exemption from the county health order, and if they put the appropriate measures in place. And Sunnyvale was one of the first cities, actually the very first school was a private school here in Sunnyvale that reopened in the Bay Area under requesting that exemption. And so schools can already do that for basically the lower grades. But from a kind of a school district standpoint, a lot of the school districts are still evaluating whether or not going to a hybrid standpoint or staying remote learning in the short term is what their plans are. And so, or whether or not, when they will actually look at bringing students back in the classroom. So I've been talking to several school board members, several superintendents on exactly that, trying to make sure that things are safe for our students, for our parents, for their families, and for the teachers, of course, which is really critical. So right now, schools have opened up remote learning in the last few weeks, and so kids are back to school, although a lot of it is the difficulty of remote learning. There are certain schools that, mainly charter schools, private schools, that have been looking at opening up and getting that waiver from the county. So that, things are changing, and this is the whole thing right now. Things are changing across our city, county, state. And I've been seeing gyms have started operation outside, and now that they conceivably can have 10% inside. From a city order, we streamlined the whole process to have the operation of certain businesses outdoors, and so that whole permitting process is streamlined. The fees have been waived, as long as there's no real inspection. So if, like the gyms, I know of several gyms that have set up equipment out in their parking lot, so where people can use the punching bag or using mats or weights outdoors, and then appropriately cleaning those down. So this is the whole, from an operational standpoint, it's opening up and making sure that those businesses can actually operate as much as possible during the current shelter-in-place order. And then, normally I don't talk much about the weather. On Tuesday, we had winds that basically created very smoky skies, and but with a lack of kind of the smoky smell. So, the smoke was coming from the August complex fire in Mendocino National Forest, but high winds kept that smoke at a high altitude. And so instead of settling at kind of a surface level, which we normally see, then, it was all at a high altitude. And then on Wednesday, and I'll say Wednesday was very unique as far as the Bay Area was concerned. On Wednesday morning the wind shifted, bringing in new ash from the Bear Fire in Chico down in the Bay Area. But with that marine layer, and normally that marine layer burns off, and the ground heats up and the marine layer burns off. That being said, that wasn't the case that day, and it caused a dark and very orange day. The sun never, the sun never really reached the ground, never burned off that marine layer. So Tuesday, Wednesday were very unique from a Bay Area standpoint. It was all orange skies, or on Tuesday and Wednesday, or it was just dark. It was still dark at 8 or 9 a.m. And this is a very unique time, to say the least. But from a weather standpoint, between the lightning strikes, the thousands of lightning strikes that we had in the last month, the fires that have then resulted, the heat waves that we've had, and from fire season standpoint, September is usually our worst fire season, September and beginning of October. And so we're only starting, we're still at the beginning of the month. And so that to me is pretty critical, that we need to be safe, and hopefully the air quality, and we'll talk soon about the air quality, will how much that will be affected by the fires is still to be seen. And then as far as other events this week, last night there were two events. One was another Unity listening event, and so this was a Spanish-speaking community dialogue. So that was one of the things that I wanted to focus on as mayor, is making sure that we're reaching out to as many portions of our community as possible, and we do have a good number of Spanish speakers in our community, and making sure that they feel safe, that they feel understood and heard in our community, is really important. And so I started my evening last night with doing my Spanish introduction to a Unity event, to a panel that heard from our residents and heard some of their concerns. And then later in the evening was a mayor forum. So it is election season, so we'll have a certain number of these forums to hear from the different mayors, from the different people that are running, or different people that are running for mayor, the different people that are running in their council districts. And so thanks for everyone who attended. Definitely there are there are a lot of things going on right now. I had, I think, 3 or 4 different concurrent meetings that I had last evening. But I think this is a great way to hear from the people that are running for mayor, and I'm hoping that you've heard from me over the last multiple years, from either my weekly office hours that I've always had, to these live stream events, to just meeting with me, talking with me, having Zoom meetings. It's important to hear what their mayor and what your goals are, what your vision is. And I hope that I gave a good vision, of a good description of what my vision is for continuing to improve the quality of life in Sunnyvale, looking at my accomplishments over the last 20 months as mayor, as well as my 4 years on city council. I think I've made a difference in our city, made our city feel more inclusive, and so hopefully you get a chance to listen to that event, or listen to one of the upcoming events. And so I will always put those events on my event page, and making sure that people understand that they're coming up. And let me give you an update on several upcoming events. So the draft housing study was released, and the housing study was kicked off several years ago to look at several different issues. It was so that has already went through the Housing and Human Services Commission, that draft, for recommendations to City Council. But it was to look at kind of what we could do in getting feedback from all of our different residents, whether or not they're homeowners, whether or not they're renters, whether or not they live in the mobile home communities. what we can do to make sure that we have a varied housing stock, what we can do to protect our residents, whether or not they're renters, whether or not they're living in a mobile home community, what we should be doing from a city standpoint to add to affordable housing, and whether or not it's putting a right to lease measure in place. So there's 13 different kind of recommendations, and there's other ones that aren't, that conceivably could be added. I've talked to the director of housing, and heard her presentation on what can be done. And so I think hopefully people can find time to actually review that, go through that document, and as always, write to the city manager, write to council on additional suggestions, or prioritizing what needs to get done. And so that will come to council on October 13th. So you have about a month to continue looking at that, and getting your input as far as what can be done on housing. And one of the things that I was appointed to in early August was an unhoused uh, task force from a county standpoint, making sure that what are we doing for our homeless population around the city, around the county. I've been working with the county supervisors on our cold weather shelter and getting that converted to basically an interim shelter as people try to find housing. So that was one of the big things that I did when I first got on council several years ago. And then, of course, other upcoming events is our next Unity listening event. So that will be our fifth event, and in taking the mayor's pledge, it was important from my standpoint to basically say that we're going to go through a process. So back, now way back in June, after the murder of George Floyd, one of the first things I did was take that mayor's pledge that we are going to go through a process of engaging our community, hearing what their concerns are, reporting our policies, and then conceivably looking at reforming. And so this is part of that process. It's making sure that we're engaging, as many of our residents to hear, their concerns about, they're dealing with our public safety department. There are concerns about, what this social equity is within Sunnyvale. And so from my standpoint, it was important to kind of go through this, and this is a long-term effort. This isn't, last year we kicked off an effort in regards to the hate crime that occurred in our community. And so we had kind of a first meeting, and at least that first event was a few hundred people in a room, talking about issues, hearing, from different perspectives in our community. This has been something similar. So it was a general session back in June. We had a youth session, an LGBTQ session. Yesterday we had a Spanish-speaking, dialogue, and and later this month, on September 24th. So two Thursdays from now, we'll have basically a public safety roundtable discussion. So talking about our public safety policy, our transparency, and we've done a lot of effort in the last few months to either remove the carotid hold, so removing all of our chokeholds from our policy, being more transparent, as far as incidents about complaints, which was just released 2 weeks ago, releasing all the descriptions of the last 10 years of officer involved shootings, so all that is really critical. And the report of what the feedback has been from the community, what our findings are, will come back to council in October, and at that point we'll figure out what our steps forward are, what additional policies we need to put in place, and as well as how do we want to continue this conversation? I think, to me, this has been a great way to involve the community, to hear from them, and I'll continue to work with the chief and the city manager on what we can do from a city to make sure that our residents feel safe, and more importantly, they feel heard. So, with that, let's go on to the county dashboard. And from a health dashboard standpoint, and from a state standpoint, we're now up to about 742,000 cases. That's and almost 14,000 deaths. So, COVID-19 continues to happen. I would say that there's been a little bit of a leveling off, but from that standpoint, it is very active in our community. I heard of, someone who passed away just earlier this week that was affected by COVID-19. And from a county level, at least, things are looking better. New cases decreased over the last week. Yesterday, the county reported the total of cases as 18,854. That's only up about 900 since last week, since last Friday, which is a big step down from 1,400 the week before that, and 1,400 the week before that. So we're under 1,000 from a county standpoint. We've had 263 deaths. That's 10 more since last week. That's at least, a little bit of a downward trend for the last few weeks. So it's good to see. Good to see our death counts drop a little bit. And currently we have 128 hospitalizations compared to 138 the week before. So we are seeing hospitalizations drop also. But of course, it was Labor Day weekend, and we'll see that whether or not there was whether or not people were actually following what they're doing and following safe measures. And then from a city standpoint, San Jose had 12,487 cases. That's up 600 from the previous week, but that's way down from 900 the previous 2 weeks before that. And Sunnyvale has now had 888 cases. That's up 70 from last week, which is about the same as the week before that. So we've leveled off. And from a county standpoint, we've seen at least a downward trend as far as the number of new cases coming through. And from my standpoint, I continue to do a lot of advocating on your behalf. I talk with the county supervisors. The big thing is, the mobile health van will be coming back to Murphy Park next Monday, so September 14th. And for the next few months, it's the second and fourth Mondays here in Sunnyvale. But it's completely by appointment, and that link should be up later today. So keep watching the Facebook feed and Nextdoor. That's an important step. Making sure that people can get tested. Anyone who wants to get tested, whether or not it's the essential workers or whether or not it's people that have been out at restaurants or at parties and feel that they might have come in contact with somebody that wasn't safe socially distancing. And so that's an important thing. And after working with county staff, the appointments are now not just in English, they're also in Spanish. They moved to Vietnamese. They're moving into several other languages, but it's really important that people have that ability to get tested if they want. And if you need to find a location to get tested, remember you can always go to sccfreetest.org, and it has a full list of locations around the county, and that you can go to. There's several permanent locations in Mountain View. There's the pop-up locations that are happening. The county fairgrounds barely has a lot of locations that are there. And I'm happy to hear that Google is actually stepping up to the plate, and they'll be providing testing locally for our public safety officers, for our frontline workers from a city standpoint at one of their campuses here, to basically whether or not it's the public safety officers, is it our inspectors that are going, our fire inspectors, or our planning inspectors that are doing on-site inspections and need to get tested. So thank you to the county, thank you to Google for providing additional infrastructure and doing those essential services, that essential testing for those essential services that are out there. So let's go ahead and get to new questions. Let's see, when is the Matilda monster change complete? And I've gotten that question from several residents over the last few weeks. The Matilda monster construction, that realigning of Matilda has been going on for about a year and a half now. We kicked that effort off at the beginning of 2019, and I'm overjoyed to hear that they basically stayed on track. And I think it's been a little bit easier and affected some fewer people during COVID-19, but they're almost done. So they still have some safety changes to do. They still have some traffic timing and signal timing to take care of, but we are very, very close. I was able to get out on my bike last week and ride the cycle track along Moffett Park Drive. So we have the pedestrian overcrossing at Borregas over 237, and now that there's a full cycle track that's separated, so conceivably a class 1 trail that's separated from Moffett Park Drive, connecting Borregas and ultimately going all the way to Matilda, and farther, going further down Moffett Park Drive, going to basically on into Mountain View over to Ellis. So that's one of the improvements that's actually been that to me is very positive. Making it easier for people out on their bikes to access that area. And we'll have a virtual ribbon cutting in the next few weeks. I did a video basically talking about some of the positive things about that project earlier this week, and so it'll be actually really good to see that get done. Several people have asked, and I got this question last week, and I continue to get the question, when are playgrounds going to reopen for children? Molly asked, can we get more specifics on the playground reopening plan? Is there a date? Which playgrounds will be opening first? So a lot of this had to do with the county shelter-in-place order. There were some, I'll say, there's some confusion between the state order and the county order. Playgrounds were allowed to be open, and a county order basically said that they needed to be sterilized between each use, and that wasn't really reasonable. It wasn't feasible for staff to actually, and it depended upon different portions on the county website had conflicts, and so they finally updated that last week. From a city standpoint, we put a plan in place. Playgrounds are, and the county order clarified what they were doing, and so playgrounds are now allowed to open, but there needs to be signage. The kids need to sanitize before and after that usage, and parents need to socially distance. So, I talked to the city manager. They finally have their plan in place. They got the signage either yesterday or today, and we'll try and do a trial of 4 different parks to start. And part of this will be monitoring whether or not residents are following that sign. But the signage will basically say that kids need to sanitize before and after, and they're really playing at their own risk. Parents also need to socially distance, and so I think that this is a good step, and we'll monitor that if those, and as far as the first 4 parks that'll be opening up, and this is what a lot of parents have been asking for, especially during the remote learning. So kids are having to stay inside, they're doing that remote learning, and what they want to do is get out to parks, get out to playgrounds after their school day is done, And so the first 4 parks that'll be opening are Lakewood Park, Braley Park, Las Palmas, and Ortega Park. So those are the first 4 parks that'll be opening, and that'll be opening on Monday. So they'll be taking down the yellow tape. They'll be putting up those signs. They'll be unlocking some of the gated areas in several of those parks. So you'll see all that happening, on Monday, and so kids can finally get out and use the playground equipment at those parks again. We'll see how it goes, and if that goes well, conceivably by a week later, or if not sooner, we will be opening up other playgrounds within the city. So I think that's an important first step. And then I've gotten this question from several people, and especially in respect to what's happening at the federal level, what's happening with the post offices. You know, I, Several people ask, I'm worried about the elections and the ability to vote, and whether or not there'll be delays in getting my ballots, in the mail-in ballots. What can be done? What should we be doing to make sure that gets, that our right to vote? And this year, like every year, it's important to vote, but this year is especially important, and for people choosing their first directly elected mayor, to choosing who their president is, who defining, getting feedback on the multiple state ballot measures, on Measure RR, about Caltrain funding. There's a lot of very important, state measures, local measures, elections going on, and so people are worried. And I was able to talk to the county registrar end of last week, or actually last weekend, and it's important that from a county standpoint, and they set kind of what gets done, and every every state kind of defines what their process is. And so the vote from a Voters Choice Act, you will be everybody gets a mail-in ballot. So things have changed from a state standpoint, that everyone gets a mail-in ballot. But much like we did in March, you will be able to vote anywhere in the county. And it's a little bit different than March, but there'll be 22 places, 22 polling or voting centers that will be open 11 days before the 11 days before the November 3rd election. So that's an important thing, that you'll have 11 days to either turn in your absentee ballot, go there and vote in person if you want, or and one of the things that you can do now is register to vote, same day registration. So you can go there if you're not a registered voter, and I suggest that if you're not a registered voter, please go ahead and register now. Don't wait till the last minute. But that being said, you can do same day registration and voting. So for those 11 days prior to the election in November, you'll be able to go and vote at 22 locations throughout the county. And then so there'll also be another 88 locations that'll be open just before, another voting centers that'll be open 4 days prior to election. And so that will be from Halloween on. So that will kind of clarify things. From Halloween through Election Day, there will be 100+ voting centers around the county where people can go and vote. And so, last time and previously in the March election, over 80% of the votes were returned by mail. And it used to be that, your mail-in ballot needed to be postmarked by Election Day or on Election Day, and then the county expected to receive, and had a cutoff of 3 working days after Election Day to receive those absentee ballots, those mail-in ballots. And for those ballots, the signature is checked on every ballot. It's not actually done by a machine. It's done by a person who actually goes through and checks your signature. So that's one of the reasons why I like to actually you know uh, like to vote in person. You kind of go through that ahead of time. But that signature check for those mail-in ballots is not done by not done by machine. It goes through, if the signatures don't match, it goes through a whole extra level of review. Uh, and then they actually contact the voter if the signatures don't match. So there's a whole process as far as proving that your absentee ballot matches. But one of the questions, of course, as far as the post office is concerned, and because the delays with the post office is it 3 working days? What they're doing now is extending that to 17 days, and it's not working days, but 17 days past the past the election day for mail-in ballots. They will still be accepting additional mail-in ballots from the post office. So if there are delays from a postal standpoint, they at least have 2 weeks to actually get those ballots. So I think that's really an important thing, to make sure that the process does actually work, which is critical. And then if you don't want to mail, and if you don't, and to me, I normally turn in my absentee ballot in person just to get my little sticker and make sure that it's actually received. There will also be ballot boxes and around the county, and it's 100 plus ballot. No, sorry, I think so around 100, so about 90, somewhere between 90 and 100 ballot boxes besides the voting center, the 100 plus voting centers themselves. There will be ballot boxes around the county where county officials actually county staff come and pick those up on a daily basis. And so that to me is the easiest way, because you're not dealing with the postal service. You're basically doing a drop off and then immediately being picked up by county staff, county registrar of voters, then immediately count those ballots. So there's a lot of things. There's making sure that our elections work, making sure that your voice counts and it is counted, is really important. So that's one of the things that the county is doing to make sure that everyone is heard. One of the questions I got earlier this morning is, will the market close this weekend because of air quality? And that's one of the big things, that if you check the air quality, it's supposed to be hazardous, not just unhealthy, but hazardous tomorrow, and unhealthy on Sunday. So whatever you're doing, please stay inside if you have health conditions. Whatever physical exertion that you're doing outside, please take care of yourself. The air quality is going to be very, very poor because of the fires and the way the winds are going to be blowing this weekend. The air quality over the last few days has not done well, and so what some of the high atmosphere, at least from what I've read, some of the high atmosphere particulate matter is going to be lowering to a lower level. So those fires and that smoke is actually going to be affecting us a lot more. So so definitely take care of yourself. But I've checked with urban markets that manages our, and several other farmers markets right now. They're still planning to open as usual. So if you're going out, go early. Wear your mask. Getting fresh food, supporting our farmers, supporting our small businesses is really critical. So if you can go tomorrow, definitely go. And then other questions that I got: what's happening with the state of the city? So the state of the city, last year I was overjoyed about our state of the city and creating an inclusive event, which highlighted all of the different nonprofits and service organizations that happen within our city. We brought in muralists to do 5 different murals, so the same day as the state of the city itself. And you'll be able to find those murals on Murphy Avenue right now. There's a temporary art exhibit of last year's state of the city murals. So you'll find those on historic Murphy Avenue, right near the breezeway, or actually right near the breezeways, in the middle of kind of between Washington Avenue and Evelyn. So definitely about halfway down the block, you'll be able to see those murals. And what's happening with this year's State of the City, it's going all virtual. And I think, that was really important to set the example as far as, safe social distancing. As much as when we started the summer and hoping that we might be able to have small gatherings and bring people together to hear the speeches, to hear most importantly, the community awards. And so, there's several community awards: Business of the Year, Teacher of the Year, Student of the Year, Resident of the Year, and of course the Mayor's Awards of Excellence. And so we, over the last week or two, we've been videotaping those awards, and also getting some photos from the recipients themselves of those awards. So it'll be a mixture of speech, but the good thing about being all video is we also get to see some photos of different portions of the city, different operations. That I think the experience is going to be a lot more interesting. We'll be able to see photos of different parks, the changes along Matilda, and then just who our award winners are, them and their families, and some of the operations. So I think it'll be actually very positive from that standpoint. But the State of the City, that video address should be dropping in about a week. So that is already on my website, and on my Facebook page as far as that event, and showing as far as what are kind of some sort of normalcy, trying to achieve some sort of normalcy, although it's not really. This is the new normal that we're going under. And what should I do? And I get this question every week. What should I do to be prepared for evacuations or emergencies? And September is Preparedness Month. The air is a little bit better than it was earlier this week, but of course this weekend is going to be worse. As for the wildfires themselves, the SCU lightning fire, which is 396,000 acres, is finally 98% contained, and that went through, ultimately that went through 5 different counties: Santa Clara County, Alameda, up basically to the east, and that's 98% contained. Of course, the CZU lightning fire in Santa Cruz and San Mateo counties, that's about 86,000 acres, and it's 85% contained. So, make sure that you stay informed, from an evacuation standpoint. Sign up at nixle.com, sign up at secalert.org. It's really important that you are prepared for whatever the emergency is. And there's lots of good information on the city website, on posts that I've done on being prepared however you can. And I think that's an important, it's important that we, conceivably look at whatever that emergency might be, whether or not it's wildfires, earthquakes. It's important that, you are prepared, because that ounce of precaution makes a big difference when the emergency actually happens. And then as far as what's happening, we got this question a few weeks ago. What's happening with the Fair Oaks renovation and the Magical Bridge playground construction? From our standpoint, finally on Tuesday, so this upcoming Tuesday evening, we will be awarding, from a council standpoint, a bid to actually start that construction. And so that's really good. That final bid will uh, pave the way for construction to begin later this fall. And that will take about 12 to 14 months to complete, but it's actually a good first step forward as far as that's concerned. When will speeds be lowered along El Camino? That finally happened last week. That the speed limit was lowered from 40 miles per hour to 35 miles per hour, and that was one of the things that I've been advocating for a while now. Is in Mountain View and in Santa Clara, the speed along El Camino Real is 35 miles per hour. For years, residents have been asking for it to be lowered. It's for people as we try to encourage biking, and we approve the ATP plan to actually improve and increase the number of bike lanes along El Camino Real, and for pedestrian safety, as we saw the incident near Peterson School, last October. Making sure that it's as safe as possible and lowering those speeds helps to make sure that residents feel safe. And if there is an accident car to car, speed, is an important part of how people are affected. Speed does kill, and it's important that 5 miles per hour does make a difference. So those signs went up last week, and I'm really happy that Caltrans was able to do the appropriate studies. It is a state route. We don't own El Camino, and they've been working to make sure that the appropriate traffic study was done, and then get the funding to change those signs out. And so they've changed those signs out over the last week. No, it's after 10, so let's go ahead and wrap up. Okay, that's better. So it's after 10 p.m. Thank you for joining me again this week. Happy Patriot Day. I'm sure most of you remember where you were on 9/11 when the world changed, and we're kind of going through another life-changing event right now as we figure out a new normal under COVID-19. It's been an interesting 6 months, to say the least, and how we move forward and how things change over the next 6 months, over the next year, is pretty critical. And so I hope that I've helped you understand and figure out how we work through this. And we work through this together. Please be safe this weekend, with the air quality being hazardous on Saturday and very unhealthy on Sunday. Please do whatever you can to take care of yourself. And as always, I continue to be proud of Sunnyvale's response to the pandemic. I know it continues to be difficult and new issues come up every week, but your response does make a difference. Help your neighbors, make and share masks, mow your neighbor's lawn, share baked goods, write positive chalk messages on your sidewalk. Continue to build community and help others. And helping others does make a difference. It makes you feel good. It makes them feel good. But especially during these critical times, it helps, make our community stronger. So I'm proud of Sunnyvale's residents pulling together, helping strangers. If you're out on a walk, wave, say hello. People miss that social interaction. It's difficult from a mental standpoint, and not having that. Sunnyvale will emerge from this as a stronger community. We're in this together, and we will get through this together. Thanks for listening. Until next week, of course, stay cool, stay safe, wear your mask, and have a good and safe weekend. Take care. Until next week. Bye.